And welcome to FISM News. I'm Samuel Case.
And I'm Renata Kiss.
And tonight, President Biden struggles in a make-or-break press conference.
Meanwhile, NATO wraps up its annual summit in D.C.
And the Army lists pro-life groups as terrorists. All right, first we got to start with President Biden's conference yesterday, his so-called big boy press conference. We go to FISM's Ian Patrick right off the bat for a detailed breakdown on how the president fared yesterday, especially in the eyes of U.S. voters.
President Biden held his so-called big boy press conference yesterday, insisting that he's running to finish the job despite growing calls to step down.
The consideration is that I think I'm the most qualified person to run for president. I beat him once, and I will beat him again. I'm just going to keep moving, and because, look, I got more work to do. We got more work to finish. There's so much, we made so much progress. I'm not in this for my legacy. I'm in this to complete the job I started.
But another series of verbal mistakes and slip-ups failed to garner a generally positive outlook for the president. While taking questions from reporters, Biden would often take a long time to answer and speak in a hushed tone. There were also some verbal gaffes, such as when he referred to Vice President Kamala Harris as Vice President Trump.
What concerns do you have about Vice President Harris's ability to beat Donald Trump if she were at the top of the ticket?
Look, I wouldn't have picked Vice President Trump to be vice president, but I think she was not qualified to be president. So let's start there.
Another concerning moment happened near the end of the press conference. Biden responded to questions about stepping aside if he were called to do so. The president said he would, but quietly whispered that it won't happen.
I got overwhelming support. Overwhelming support. I won, I forget how many votes I won in the primary. Overwhelming. And so tomorrow, if all of a sudden I show up at the convention, everybody says, we want somebody else, that's the democratic process. It's not going to happen.
You earlier explained confidence in your vice president.
Yes.
If your team came back and showed you data that she would fare better against former President Donald Trump, would you reconsider your decision to stay in the race?
No, unless they came back and said, there's no way you can win. Me. No one's saying that. No poll says that.
Now, he wasn't safe earlier in the day either, unfortunately. During the NATO summit, Biden spoke of Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky by accidentally referring to him as Russian President Vladimir Putin.
And now I want to hand it over to the president of Ukraine, who has as much courage as he has determination. Ladies and gentlemen, President Putin. President Putin. We're going to beat President Putin. President Zelensky. I'm so focused on beating Putin, we got to worry about it. Anyway, Mr. President,
I'm better.
You are a hell of a lot better.
But back to the conference, overall, his wasn't as bad as his performance at the debate. In fact, some reports praised the president for his answers on foreign policy in particular, but it still wasn't enough to help his chances with mostly fellow Democrats. After the conference, at least 3 more House Democrats called for Biden to leave the race. Adding themselves to this list is Connecticut Representative Jim Himes, California Representative Scott Peters, and Illinois Representative Eric Sorensen. And it isn't just Democrat colleagues that see the writing on the wall for the president. A new ABC News Washington Post poll shows that at least 2/3 of Americans agree that Biden should step aside and allow someone else to run. In that same poll, Trump just barely defeats Biden 47 to 46%, which, among everything else, marks a reflection of similar polling in recent months, where Trump has been consistently ahead of Biden. However, if Vice President Kamala Harris were to replace Biden, she currently would find herself leading Trump by about 2 percentage points, and that's according to that same poll. Biden even commented on the possibility of Harris taking over, saying that she is capable to run the country if needed.
I wouldn't have picked her unless I thought she was qualified to be president. From the very beginning. I made no bones about that. She is qualified to be president. That's why I picked her.
Now, rather unfortunately, it seems as though a takeover of both the Democrat and Republican candidates might be more preferable for most voters. According to Pew Research, both Trump and Biden are considered embarrassing candidates by at least 60% of U.S. voters. This is Ian Patrick reporting for FISM News.
Well, thanks for that report, Ian. Meanwhile, former President Obama and ex-Speaker Nancy Pelosi have allegedly met in private over President Biden. Sources told CNN that even though both agree that Biden will likely not beat Trump in November, they're not quite sure what to do about it. This comes despite Democrats desperately wanting Obama and Pelosi to unite their party before it's too late. According to CNN, more than a dozen Congress members agree that Biden's candidacy is reaching the end, and it's just a matter of how things will play out. But the clock is ticking, and Democrats need to figure out what to do next before greater damage is done. However, not everyone is convinced that Obama and Pelosi have been discussing the president in private. One anonymous source said that anyone who claims the two have been talking about the issue secretly is simply not telling the truth. While Obama has been lending a listening ear to concerned politicians, he's been careful not to say anything that could potentially leak.
But there certainly are reasons to be concerned. In fact, Democrats are hitting the panic button as Donald Trump is gaining ground even in the liberal stronghold of New York. President Biden won the Empire State by 23 points back in 2020. Now his lead is just in the single digits. A recent Siena poll from June shows Biden now with a mere 8-point lead. And by the way, it should be noted that was taken before his disastrous debate a couple weeks later. Politico says the quote, warning signs are impossible to ignore at this point. Two private polls conducted in a swing New York House district reviewed by Politico show Trump currently leading Biden there by 1 point. One local Democrat official went as far as saying, quote, I truly believe we're a battleground state now.
Meanwhile, Chicago is cleaning up the streets ahead of the Democratic National Convention. The city promised to clean up its largest homeless encampment before July 17th. The 22 people at that camp agreed to move to a shelter for now, and this comes as a local official noted that the DNC could deal with security issues if the city doesn't clear out the area. Department of Family and Support Services Commissioner Brandy Nazi said her plan is to make sure that moving the homeless is done in a trauma-informed way and that it's not disruptive. But some of the homeless in the tent city aren't convinced that officials will help provide permanent housing. One 57-year-old said the city just wants them out of the way, and another said he'll believe it when he sees it. The Daily Caller reports that Chicago's homeless population has grown from roughly 6,000 to over 18,000 this past year.
And turning our attention now to the Republicans, where the RNC is receiving blowback over its decision to have OnlyFans model and former stripper Amber Rose speak at the party's convention next week. Rose, who is perhaps best known, at least recently, for her past relationship with Kanye West, endorsed Donald Trump earlier this year.
For me, Donald Trump is the epitome of an alpha male, right? He's there to protect, provide, make sure the citizens of the U.S. are, in a good economy, protecting us. I feel protected by Donald Trump. That's why I wanted to come out and publicly endorse him, because I just feel safe.
Earlier this week, she posted on social media, quote, it's true, I'm speaking at the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee. That was also apparently confirmed by the Trump team as well. Many conservatives were outraged by the news, not just over her sexual notoriety either, but also because of her support for abortion and LGBT issues, just to name a couple of things. A few months ago, Rose even publicly defended Satanism, specifically praising it for helping women get abortions.
I'm an atheist, for sure.
Not a Satanist.
I'm not a Satanist, no.
And there is a distinction.
Satanists are just, they're atheists as well, but they're just more political.
Okay.
They have like it's actually a very rational, logical religion. They help a lot of people, a lot of women to get abortions in southern states that, where they're illegal. They help a lot of the gay community, the LGBTQ plus community. They're really great with that.
And this, of course, is just the latest controversy for the RNC after angering pro-life Republicans last week when it dropped calls for a national abortion ban in the GOP's official 2024 platform. Okay, and up next, Israel releases a new report on the security failures surrounding October 7th. We'll get the details on that report and more after this short break.
FISM News is a conservative news outlet bringing you the latest updates from a biblical worldview. With us, you get just the news grounded in truth. And now with the new FISM TV app, you can take FISM News with you wherever you go, so you're never behind on what's happening. We update the app regularly with short clips you can watch at your convenience. So go ahead, visit the App Store and download the FISM TV app. Start exploring all of our content anytime, anywhere.
There are moments in life that define us. Choices determine the courses we take. Choices that create life, or those that save a life. And some make life worthwhile. There are decisions to stay, or to go, to remain the same, or to grow. Sometimes we pray and make peace. Other times we take a stand for what we believe. In celebration, mourning, triumph, and defeat, we are invested in every decision we seek. Despite differences, we have one thing in common, the desire to do all for the glory of God. Keep your wallet aligned with your heart and your investments in harmony with your faith. Timothy Plan, biblically responsible mutual funds, ETFs, and retirement plans. Before investing, carefully consider a fund's investment objective, risks, charges, and expenses contained in the prospectus available at timothyplan.com. Read carefully before investing.
Hi, I'm Aisha. At first, I was debating whether or not I was really pregnant and took a test. While I was waiting, they talked to me about different pregnancy choices and different options and information that helped me be more educated. To confirm, I got an ultrasound of the pregnancy test, and it was for sure positive, and I got to hear and see my baby for the first time. Hearing the heartbeat made me cry, and it was certain that I was going to keep my baby forever.
Hey, and welcome back to FISM News. I'm Samuel Case. As I said, we're going to move away from national politics now to some international news. And we begin in Israel, where the IDF is now taking responsibility for security failures on October 7th. In a new report, officials outline how the IDF failed to live up to its standards during Hamas's terror attack, especially in the small border village of Kibbutz Be'eri, where over 100 civilians were killed and 30 more taken hostage. Many were relying on local security forces to protect them in the area. Residents even alleged the IDF arrived at the village 4 hours after Hamas had originally invaded and then refused to enter. Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant has since called for a more in-depth investigation into what happened.
And still in Israel here, Israel's Ministry of Foreign Affairs revealed recently that the UN's UNRWA agency is currently employing 100 terrorist operatives. Israel has been saying for a while that UNRWA employees were complicit in the October 7 attacks, but they haven't been able to identify the scope of terrorist infiltration until now. Ambassador Amir Weisbrod wrote in a 4th of July letter addressed to the UN saying that hundreds of terrorists, members of Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad have been employed by UNRWA in the Gaza Strip. He added that some people held high-ranking positions at UNRWA or in Hamas. Weisbrod then shared the 100 names and IDs of the terrorist operatives. The ambassador said that the list is only a small number of people and that the names of other employees will be sent in the future. Weisbrod asked for the immediate termination of these employees.
And the 75th anniversary summit of NATO came to a close yesterday in Washington, D.C., with member countries bolstering support for Ukraine in its ongoing war with Russia. There, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky urged NATO to lift restrictions on its use of long-range weapons against targets in Russia, which Ukraine said would be an absolute game changer in the war.
We, of course, if we want to win, if we want to prevail, if we want to save our country and to defend it, we need to lift all the limitations. I spoke about it with partners, with UK leader, with United States President, with Secretary, all of that.
Enemy can directly attack to our civilians, children hospitals, schools, and we have these restrictions. I think that it will be really game changer.
During a meeting with Zelensky, President Biden announced a new $225 million security package for Ukraine, telling Zelensky at the time, quote, "We will stay with you, period." It comes as NATO issued a declaration on Wednesday saying Ukraine is now on an irreversible path to NATO membership.
We have strong warning regarding the irreversibility of Ukraine's movement towards NATO. Every step truly brings us closer to membership. We are doing and will continue to do everything to ensure that the day comes when Ukraine is invited and becomes a NATO member.
NATO's declaration also included some rather sharp words for China, calling it a decisive enabler of Russia. China responded to that language, saying the declaration was biased and accused it of sowing discord. NATO chief Jens Stoltenberg said, quote, "China cannot continue to fuel the largest military conflict in Europe without this impacting Beijing's interests and reputation."
Meanwhile, the U.S. will deploy more long-range missiles in Germany starting in 2026, including more advanced missiles that have ever been deployed to Europe. According to the joint announcement, the new units will include SM-6, Tomahawk, and developmental hypersonic weapons. U.S. and Germany say they plan to demonstrate American commitment to NATO and its contribution to European defense. However, it's renewed fears of another expensive arms race. In 2019, the U.S. pulled out of a previous Cold War-era deal that banned ground-based missiles with a range exceeding 500 kilometers. Now, for some perspective, the Tomahawk can travel nearly 5 times that distance. Russia's Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov responded that the planned deployment is damaging to Russia's security. He vowed a without nerves, without emotions military response. But White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan says that Russian saber rattling will not deter the U.S. from keeping the alliance strong.
And we're also now learning that the U.S. and Germany have foiled a Russian plot to assassinate the head of a powerful German arms company for providing military support for Ukraine. His name is Armin Paperger, the CEO of Rheinmetall. It's a vital supplier of artillery shells to Ukraine, and it also has plans to open an armored vehicle plant inside Ukraine as well. According to CNN, the U.S. uncovered the assassination plans earlier this year and notified German authorities, who then stepped up security around the CEO and his company headquarters. It's just one of several plots uncovered against executives of prominent European arms manufacturers, and a NATO official appeared to confirm this report yesterday. NATO, as a result, is now improving intelligence sharing throughout the alliance in order to counteract Moscow's subversion campaign. And coming up next, more and more illegal Chinese nationals come across the border. We'll look at that and more after a moment in history.
Welcome back to A Moment in History. I'm Seth Udinsky. The 20th century is defined by 2 catastrophic world wars. Now, while the second of these left an undeniable mark on global civilization, the first was also pretty catastrophic. In the United States, the American legacy of the Great War is intertwined with the legacy of the man who led the nation during its involvement in this war. Now, he's a complicated fellow, respected by some and berated by others, the 28th President of the United States and the man at the head of the nation during World War I, Democratic President Woodrow Wilson. Now, Wilson's origin story is nothing if not complex. He was born in 1856 in Virginia, the son of a Presbyterian pastor. Wilson's father was a veteran of the Civil War, but for the Confederate side. Now, this makes Wilson, in the annals of American history, the first sitting president with such a personal, overt family tie to the Confederacy. As president, he would enact certain laws in support of segregation, showing a questionable mark on his moral code and whether the ideals of the Confederacy ever really left him. Now, he would attend Princeton University, where he would eventually become the institution's president in 1902. Now, he was in many ways the Democrat mirror of Teddy Roosevelt in his personal leadership. Wilson's victory in the 1912 election, some historians argue, is partially due to Roosevelt, who chose to run for a third time after he had left office in 1909. With Republicans split between Roosevelt and the incumbent William Howard Taft, Wilson won the Democratic ticket. Not long after his victory, several tiny nations in Eastern Europe got into a little bit of a tiff that, due to the interconnection of the alliances in Europe, led to the outbreak of the Great War in 1914, and of course we know it as World War I. While the war cast a constant shadow over Wilson's presidency back at home, he was able to accomplish some notable achievements, including the enactment of child protection laws in the workforce and the institution of an 8-hour workday. Now, of course, he was also notorious for instituting a resegregation of certain political offices that had been opened to black politicians during the generations following the Civil War. Now, his most famous act came in his second term when he, under the slogan to, quote, make the world safe for democracy, entered the United States into World War I in 1917. The American entrance gave the Allied forces the firepower they needed to defeat the Central Alliance in 1918. Now, in a very controversial effort to sustain world peace after the war, Wilson helped create the Treaty of Versailles and with it the League of Nations. Now, the League, as history tells us, did very little to actually prevent another more serious war. Wilson lived his final years in deteriorating health after he left office in 1921 before his death in 1924. Thanks so much for joining me once again for A Moment in History.
Are you new to biblically responsible investing? As Christians, we have the responsibility to be good stewards of the money God has entrusted us with. As we invest in the market, we want to make sure that the companies we invest in aren't taking money and using it to fund industries that grieve the heart of God, like pornography, abortion, gambling, or the LGBT agenda. That doesn't mean a company must be a Christian company to be biblically responsible. It means that company is solely focused on excellence in its industry and doesn't support things that God hates. To learn more about biblically responsible investing and how you can put it to practice in your portfolio, go to financialissues.org.
The mission of Financial Issues is to expose Jesus for all he is, all he means, and all that he can do.
On the day I found I was pregnant, I was full of emotions and I just was so overwhelmed, and I don't know if I'm ready for this huge, life-altering, changing commitment. I had individuals around me not wanting me to have this child. And somehow, I was driving and I saw the Women's Help Center sign and I immediately turned in. That just took relief off of me, and I was like, you know what? It's gonna be okay. They gave me the confidence and the support that I needed to be able to go out and face the world. First time I held Finnegan, I just lit up with joy. I was so excited. This little boy that I had in my life, he is loving and generous. Watching him just grow and flourish into this incredible human being has just been so rewarding and so uplifting. Looking back, I don't know what I would do without him, because I needed him more than I think he needed me.
And welcome back to FISM News. I'm Renata Kiss. Well, let's continue with some national news here. House Republicans are raising concerns over a growing number of illegal Chinese national border crossings. Yesterday, 17 House GOP members sent a letter to DHS Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas requesting information about the status of Chinese illegal immigrants. The group also asked Mayorkas to provide information about illegal immigrants from so-called recalcitrant countries, nations that refuse to cooperate with the U.S., and repatriating their citizens. China is one of the 13 countries the State Department has labeled as such, and one of 17 labeled as at risk of non-compliance. From 2020 to 2023, border encounters of Chinese nationals saw a dramatic spike of 1,800%. The letter expressed concern over the potential national security risk the spike poses as the situation between America and China continues to strain.
And getting a weather update for a moment here. The Northeast is feeling the lingering effects of Hurricane Beryl, with heavy flooding in Vermont and New Hampshire, collapsing bridges and causing chaos on the roads. At the same time, Beryl's remnants also spawned at least 4 tornadoes in western New York, with more than 25,000 homes and businesses losing power in the Buffalo area. Meanwhile, out west, as you see on the screen, the death toll continues to rise from this month's historic heat wave. At least 28 people have died as 9 states remain under some form of heat alert or another. According to the National Weather Service, several major cities, including Las Vegas and Phoenix, broke or at least tied their all-time record high this week.
Meanwhile, in some rather shocking news, a U.S. Army training has labeled major pro-life groups as terrorist organizations. Journalist Sam Shoemaker exposed one of the slides on X, which detailed the descriptions of these groups. The presentation included National Right to Life and Operation Rescue. The Army also shared a screenshot of a pro-life license plate called I'm For It, implying that even regular citizens can be labeled as terrorists. The qualifying descriptors of the so-called pro-life terrorists included demonstrations and protests, truth displays, picketing, and counseling on sidewalks and crisis centers. Shoemate also wrote that the Army falsely attributed the bombings of abortion clinics to National Right to Life. Pro-life Congresswoman Elise Stefanik posted on X saying, "This is despicable. The President, the Secretary of Defense, and the Secretary of Army must immediately condemn and open an investigation into this vile and dangerous attempted indoctrination of our service members."
Very disturbing, and hopefully more whistleblowers will come forward, because this is certainly un-American and something that needs to be investigated. Speaking of other scary news, it's a rather scary time for AT&T customers. Earlier today, the telecom giant claimed that tens of millions of customers have had their data leaked in a recent data breach. Executives blamed an illegal download on a third-party platform back in April, and according to the company, the compromised data affects nearly all of its cellular customers and wireless providers from May through October of 2022. Customers in January of 2023 were also affected. It's the most recent data breach for the company, which revealed back in March that information, including Social Security numbers for over 70 million people, has now appeared on the dark web.
And lastly, in some economic news, U.S. consumer prices fell 0.1% in June, the first monthly drop in 4 years. The new Labor Department data released yesterday was largely driven by a nearly 4% decline in gasoline prices. Unfortunately, shelter costs and food prices saw slight gains month over month. However, it does make for the second positive reading in a row after core consumer prices remained flat in May. The report is now fueling hope for central rate cuts in September. But nothing is certain, and the Federal Reserve will be closely watching inflation and job market readings next month.
Yeah, nothing is certain is well said. I can just think for the last, it seems like years that we've been saying they're going to cut rates, and they're just not doing it. It seems unlikely.
Yeah, we'll
at this
see.
time.
Well, we'll see. All right, well, that's our program for today. Thank you so much for joining us, and please visit FISMnews.tv for more content.
And for more updates over the weekend, you can also check out our show on social media at FISM News, or you can download the FISM app right to your smartphone. Thanks so much, God bless, and we'll see you on Monday with more news.